Wow, that was the best thing I've ever played. Well, time to play something much worse now. Deltarune Chapter 3 wasn't very good. Which isn't to say it's bad, I had a bit of fun with it, but that's it. Full disclaimer, I like Deltarune. I would even say Chapter 3 of the game was good, but like 6 out of 10 good compared to the rest of the game, which I would say is around an 8 out of 10, bordering on a 9 out of 10. Seriously, I really do like this game. Chapter 3 to me feels like a massive step back in quality from what the rest of the game had offered and what it continued to offer. If you're wondering why I'm choosing to talk about the part of the game I didn't like all too much despite claiming the game overall is amazing, well, that's because I think it's way more interesting to talk about. You can find a million videos and posts out there praising Deltarune if you want, Chapter 3 included, but I want to offer a different perspective from someone who was overall pretty dissatisfied with their experience, who isn't just someone who hates the game through and through. So let's begin with... Before we even start playing the chapter, there is an option given to us at the start to skip all the non-gameplay segments and jump right into the first game board if we've played it before, and I appreciate that. This was something both Chapter 1 and 2 did as well, though here it feels more necessary as the prelude in this chapter isn't quite as engaging, but more on that later. The gameplay of Chapter 3 is undeniably its most divisive factor, and there's a clear reason for that. This is just Zelda, and not just any Zelda. Zelda without the items and dungeons! I'm not even a fan of Zelda games, but even I can tell this is pretty shallow for what it is. Sure, there are battles and quizzes thrown your way to spice it up a bit and some fun interactions during these segments, but the actual gameplay consists mainly of walking around and grabbing enough in the MacGuffins to progress. The first board is a fine enough introduction to this type of gameplay, and I do like that the game acknowledges and rewards you, I think, for finding the extra keys that you don't need to progress. The quiz segments are extremely short and the questions range from "I don't think you can get this wrong" to "everyone gets this wrong."
What's the highly memorable heading of TV time? I think it's "Don't touch that dial." Pretty sure it's "Don't touch that dial." What? Marvelous mystery board? When did he ever say that? When did he ever say that?
Oh.
The battles are Okay, so the main issue with the gameplay in Chapter 3 bar none are the enemies and the variety of them along with their attacks. The regular shadow guys are the most common enemy you'll find, and they either shoot bullets at you or use a saxophone type attack, and to beat them pacifist you have to act to boogie, where the longer you go without getting hit the more mercy you rack up, which is pretty neat. These guys are supposed to be the figurines you see sitting in the windowsill. I assume the light coming in is casting a harsh shadow on them, making them hard to make out so only the outline of the figurine can be seen, which is why there isn't a very consistent role for these guys. They can be musicians, mafia goons, and a bunch of other stuff. Pretty cool when you realize that, honestly. The second common enemy is the Pippins, who... This is the single worst enemy in all of Deltarune, no questions asked. This guy looks gross. His relation to this world is minimal, like surely this isn't the best you could come up with in a world set inside the main character's house and is largely themed around TV. He has one attack that sometimes is just impossible to dodge because the hitbox is the size of Jupiter. The acts are so bad and lame that it's better to just use the default S and R actions from Susie and Ralsei respectively. And above all else, this one Pippin is a complete dickwad to Ram for no good reason. Like, we are not giving a single good reason to actually hate Ram, and he actually does a damn job, unlike Pippin's over here who just hops in place like a jolly little bastard. Oh yeah, nobody will shed a tear for him, huh? Well, I didn't see anyone crying about you being cut from Chapter 1, you stupid bitch! So, yeah, I'm not too fond of these guys, actually. We also have Shutter, an enemy with a really cool gimmick of being able to take a photograph of the bullet patterns on board and freeze them like a photo, then rotate it around and even unfreeze it afterwards. Even the acts are on theme and unique, on top of being fun. Yet also taking photos of varying difficulty and timing, and the closer you get to that timing, the more mercy you get. Genuinely such a well-designed enemy, and the way it meshes with other enemies is really cool. I kinda wish they instead pushed this fight even further and made it into a mini-boss with more gimmicks, but that's more of a nitpick. The final enemy out of a lot of these guys is called Zappers, who are TV remotes as bouncers, and I think that's pretty cool for a TV world. Though I do wish these guys took a bit longer to take down and had more attacks, as other than that, these are pretty cool enemies, especially with how you can interact with them through the act menu. The mute button instantly ties them, allowing Ralsei to pacify them right away, and it also mutes all of the battle audio. I love these two enemies a lot because it really feels like you're interacting with a living version of the object, or what they're meant to represent. They do both have flaws holding them back though, which is a shame. There is one more regular enemy in Chapter 3, but I almost completely forgot about it while writing the script, and you probably don't even remember them. In fact, I actually can't remember their names, they're that forgettable. Ribbix are just an upgraded reskin of the Rabbix from Chapter 1, but this time they have seemingly no reason to be here. The Rabbix were representative of dust bunnies, which made sense given how multiple things led to telling us that this empty classroom is largely abandoned, so having the huge piles of dusts formed from neglect manifest themselves as enemies was cool. But here, I just don't get it. The Dreamer household looks pretty clean if you're asking me, so is this supposed to be from their bin? Is that really such a core part of this area to cover? If you want to treat the kitchen like the backstage to the TV show, given how it lines up in the house besides the living room, then actually do that. Or if you want to have something from the bin come to life, the flowers given by Asgore that Toriel throws away would be way more interesting to see come to life. But instead of any of that, we get a reskin of a minor Chapter 1 enemy. That in total makes 5 regular enemies, which is the lowest out of any chapter by far, and makes combat overall in this chapter feel awful. Even if it's not the focus, the fact such little care was put into the encounters here is a huge letdown and hampers one of my favourite aspects of Deltarune. In fact, the combat is even more samey and repetitive because of the previously mentioned Shadow Guys. Some of you know where I'm heading with this, as I previously neglected to mention another act that the Shadow Guys allow you to perform, that being Sharpshooter. On paper this seems fine, making you aim and shoot to knock either the hat or socks off the enemy, and if enough hits are landed you can max out Mercy in a single act, only downside being that it requires all 3 of the trio to perform. The problem with all of this is that if a Shadow Guy is in a fight, regardless of anything else, you want to use this act on everybody, as it isn't just limited to affecting the Shadow Guys, which turns every encounter involving them into nothing but using Sharpshooter, which takes the elements they have previously praised from Shutter and Zapper's acts and makes them worthless. This isn't like Chapter 2 either, where some acts on enemies had synergies between each other. This is just a blanket effect that works on everything, is super easy, and is way better than manually doing anything else. The enemies don't even hit you hard enough for you to have to worry about keeping up your healing and defending midway through using your axe, so it's more just like waiting until you're allowed to continue. This is all to say that the enemy and combat variety in this chapter is awful, so surely the gameplay outside of combat will be better, right? I did lie a little bit earlier saying this is Zelda without items, as you do get one item that Susie instantly snatches from you, so there's not much interesting you get to do with it since it's out of your control. All this allows Susie to do is throw pots and pluck weeds, and sometimes throw Rousey, I guess. Oh hey, that's a Rousey plush. A real Rousey plush that you can buy right now on fangamer.com. Weird. Actually, I don't think I went into the quizzes enough earlier, and I only showed 2 of them when there's 9 questions total. So here's a few more. This one is actually pretty cool, as Chris actually moves to the answer by themselves since the question pertains to them directly, and oh look, the Rousey plush is only $32 right now, and I can buy it, the real Rousey plush, right now. There are some light, and I truly do mean light, puzzles thrown about on the board too, such as this box pushing one that you can't beat until Rousey uses his ability to turn into a box, and if you leave it for long enough without pushing him, the first board also features our first mini-boss of the chapter, Lanino and El Nina, the weather forecasters. I quite like these two. They have really cool designs, and the idea of fighting weather forecasters in this universe has so much potential. So what do we get out of it? A fight where one attack is used over and over, and a slight variation is put on that attack after a bit, and one unique attack where one is chasing the other around the box, so it's a vastly different bullet pattern, and that is the whole entire fight. The acts don't even have anything interesting to do, as all you're able to do is say, "I love TV," to up a counter, which doesn't even matter as the fight is scripted, since Tenna just comes in the end to fill up the counter anyway. I don't necessarily have a problem with that on paper, as I like the K-round fight in Chapter 1, but that was a lot more short and sweet for what it was, and it was also the very first mini-boss in the game if you don't count the Lancer fight, which calling the Lancer fight a mini-boss might be an insult to the term. We're on Chapter 3 now, this sort of simplicity doesn't really cut it anymore, and there's a lot more that could have been done with these characters. This is such an insane bit of wasted potential. Not only does this fight feel insanely repetitive, but the theming of 2 weather forecasters, one representing the sun and the other representing rain, fighting in this magical world only to have these super basic bullet patterns that you could reskin to just about anything. Can you imagine if in the Burly mini-boss in Chapter 2, instead of using his axe to send out a giant blast that scattered off into shards, he just used a tornado attack over and over? That would be super lame, right? I at least think that the detail of their little avatars changing depending on what's going on between them is cute. With the previously mentioned attack of one chasing the other, that one is really fun to dodge. Overall though, this is such a weak fight and a massive letdown for what could have been. At the end of the first board, we get treated to what Tenna dubs a physical challenge, where we emulate some kind of sadistic cooking show in front of a live studio audience. These physical challenges, as they're called, are a pretty big part of Chapter 3, and I'm just gonna come out and say that these are the best part of the chapter. I seriously do not think anything else in the chapter overall reaches the high quality of these because they set out to do a task and perform it flawlessly. I don't want to tiptoe into theming too much as we are talking about the gameplay right now, but what a great way to adapt multiple different types of TV shows into gameplay, having them be like special challenges on the game show, which allows you to not only switch up the gameplay to add variety, but also allows you to represent various areas of TV seamlessly. If there's one part of Chapter 3 I can go to bat for, it's this, and if the rest of the chapter was this well thought out, we would have something incredible on our hands. As for the minigame itself, it's simple but great. Throw the food into the customer's mouths, the more food you stack, the more points you get, but the harder it becomes to move about and jump, and touching the fire knocks all the food you're carrying off of you, and sometimes special customers will show up. That being El Nina and La Nino, who are harder to throw food at, but give more points. Closest thing I can compare it to is the Cruising for a Bruising mission from A Hat in Time Seal the Deal DLC. But unlike that, this one is actually fun. The whole thing is one big game of risk versus reward, and it's a lot of fun for what it is. Good job, Tricky Tony. Before the next board starts, there's some stuff we can mess around with, namely the various rank rooms we open up depending on the rank we got on the board. So if we got a B rank, we could only be able to open up the B rank room and lower, you get the point. Getting S or T rank just opens up everything by default though, and I got a T rank. Yes, I know, save the applause for later. The C rank room features basically nothing. Ooh. Well, I didn't expect that. I hate to say it, but outside of the initial encounter being a surprise with a good setup, having the zappers in the room holding cups of water, this fight is not funny and feels extremely forced. This is a mini-boss whose entire joke is built off of a water cooler being this big, super powerful threat, which doesn't really work for me in a game where our first main antagonist was a King of Spades playing card. The fight is super simple as the mini-boss only has 2 attacks and you just end up spamming one act over and over until it's done. You don't even have to worry about healing because despite these attacks being pretty hard to dodge, the damage done is so little that you don't have to pay much attention. A shame because I do actually like the bullet patterns, they're really fun to dodge when you get the hang of it, though I do wish the proper method of dodging them was better telegraphed. The B rank room allows us to spend points we accumulate for items, with a higher chance of gold items the more points we put in, which just means better stuff. Stuff like revive mints or unique armors. There's actually a finite amount of gold items, so you can't just grind them out forever. The A rank room just lets us replay the physical challenges, along with a new exclusive one that I assume was scrapped from the planned third board that didn't make it into the game. Good thing though, because the Susie Zilla minigame is the worst one by far. The theme is funny, but the actual controls are awful, and the difficulty to get a T rank on it compared to the others is night and day. I just gave up trying to get it, so thankfully it isn't required for anything and became optional. Now the S rank room, oh boy do I have a bone to pick with this thing, but I'll postpone that until later, it kinda needs its own segment. Don't worry Ram, we'll be back for you later. The second game board has a slightly more interesting goal that still boils down to collecting all the things to proceed. You need to take out of the ordinary photos of interesting stuff around the map, which is fine enough except the theme of the board is once again a desert area. The fights are basically the same, but it's cool that taking photos of enemies freezes them in place, so if you really wanted to you could skip over them entirely. There's a couple more gimmicks and Easter eggs related to taking photos, such as getting bonus points for taking photos of NPCs and being able to buy Lancer for cheaper by photographing the price listed under him. We can buy a puzzle block off of Rule's card which serves no purpose, and yes, we will be talking about him later. Susie switches out what control is plugged into what ports, so we actually get to use the one previously mentioned item here for some minor bridge puzzles, which are fine. After taking all the photos we need, we grab La Nino or El Nina depending on who we chose in their battle and bring them up to Lover's Peak so we can open the Rainbow Bridge. According to Tenor at least. Unfortunately for them, Rules cucks them live on stage only to propose that they become a fruple, and we don't care about this, we just want to advance to the end of the board where we face our second physical challenge. A very stripped-back Beat Mania from the PS1. I get that it's meant to be like shows of live music performances, and that's cool and all, but I wish it was more than 2 buttons. Straight up just copying DDR with the 4 keys would have been better, as limiting it to just 2 is a bit too dumbed down and leads to certain parts of the track being unnecessarily more difficult than the rest. You don't need to worry or pay attention to what Ralsei or Susie are doing, but it's cute that they have their own track to play with unique structure as they're on different instruments. And I think the detail of Ralsei changing the lyrics in real time to make them more family friendly is really funny, even if you're never going to notice it just playing the game for yourself since, you know, you're too focused on actually playing the game. Super good stuff all around though. After this, we're supposed to do a third board, but we have to do some sleuthing around. All this really amounts to just getting past a single zapper and doing some puzzles where we have to figure out the code that presents itself in some creative ways, honestly. This code being these 3 numbers, but the order they're in is based on the way these rooms connect, not the actual physical location. These are really cool, and I wish the game boards use more clever stuff like this as opposed to the most basic block pushing puzzle you've ever seen. We quickly get chucked into the third board unwillingly as Tenor spots us, but since Susie confronts him, we instead get this weird segment that's more like a long unskippable cutscene. I do like how we escape though, as we're locked to only act, so we have to utilize the acts of the enemies Tenor brings into battle, ending with us using the off switch act on the zapper to make our getaway. Honestly, it's hard to talk about the gourds? The fucking gourds? Honestly, it's hard to talk about the board strictly in a gameplay sense, as my issues with its gameplay tie to its problems with theming. I really don't understand why these are the main gameplay segments of the chapter given the theme and setting. One of my biggest issues with this compared to the regular gameplay of other chapters is that it doesn't really feel like I'm going anywhere or exploring a world. The visuals get old really quick, and instead of investigating this fantasy world where objects are given life, we get stuck playing a Zelda knockoff. Just compare how it felt progressing through the Cyber City in Chapter 2 and the game boards in Chapter 3. It's a night and day difference, and one is clearly way better than the other. I'm not bored out of my mind playing these, but I would rather be doing what I'm used to. I take it back. TV World is the worst part of this chapter, and I already wasn't huge on the boards. This segment is so boring! The exploration? Basically non-existent, as you're restricted to running down these super narrow hallway-like rooms. The visual variety? Outside of these TV screens in the background showing various TV shows, there's nothing to see here. And even then, all of these are the exact same, so once you've seen the first one, you've seen them all. The enemies are all just ones you've encountered aside from the very new and original Ribic enemy, Do Not Steal. We are so strapped for content here that there is a optional refight against the water cooler mini-boss. Great! The only thing in this entire segment that is of any interest is the other physical challenge, this time themed around westerns. It's a pretty fun one. I just wish it had a bit more to it, like maybe having cacti you need to jump over periodically. Wait, why can we jump if there's nothing to jump over? Surely this is part of the plan at some point, right? That would have been so cool! Yeah, other than that, we aren't really missing much. I really dislike this section. This is like a light version of Pandora's Palace from Chapter 2. Even Card Castle from Chapter 1 was more interesting, as while it was super simple both visually and in its gameplay, it had a lot happening in the short time that you were there. If Card Castle had none of the new enemies, or funny interactions, or shops, or important story beats, and went on for way too long with random garbage quizzes thrown in, that would be TV World. But don't worry guys, gals, and Chris Dreamers, this section is then spiced up with an encounter with rules cards! This fight sucks. It goes on for so long and you're just repeating the same thing every single turn as you have to time your button presses to hit the Lancer button, and that is literally the only thing you can do. No planning or strategy or weighing your options, basically just time your button presses then dodge the bullets. Super lame. I would complain about you fighting even more shadow guys here, but the ones in this fight actually have unique attacks, so that fixes it a little bit, but it doesn't feel very interesting. El Nino and El Nina return here with slightly different attacks. I like that their bullets actually have different properties this time and aren't just identical to each other. The laser pointer gag is the only part of this fight really worth bringing up. It's funny. With that slog of an encounter over, we get more walking with no gameplay and nothing interesting story-wise, and we're basically onto the confrontation with Tenna now.
Hey guys, I forgot to record while writing the script, but there's these sneaking segments that I'm gonna show off right now. That's it, yeah.
There is another puzzle we have to go through if we didn't play Ram's Rambunctious Quest Deluxe Edition and Knuckles, and I accidentally got it right without doing the puzzle because I saw this long ass string of numbers when, okay, no way I'm guessing that. So I just wanted to close the menu ASAP, and the face I made when the door opened was astounding. We're on our way to the Tenna boss fight, and right before that we get some exposition that we have to sit through as it's just put in this long drawn out cutscene format, but we begin the fight right after, and it's weird. The boss fight at its core is actually pretty cool if you're doing Pacifist. Your goal is to reach 1,000 points, and to reach that you have to do different physical challenges that are changed a bit to fit the boss fight better, as well as having Susie be able to gamble points on you not getting hit, and Ralsei being able to give you more points if his HP changes at all in the next attack. I feel like the game is trying to tell me something. Best example is how the music challenges track is instead changed to have you play that part of the song you're currently at in the boss fight. That is super cool. You also get some new ones thrown in here, but these aren't as good. This one is just bouncing some balls on an umbrella. This one is just bouncing some balls on an umbrella with these weather forecast banners scrolling by at the side. I can only assume this is recycled content from the El Nina and La Nino fight that didn't make it. The other one is where we have to shoot tiny Tennas, which may look a bit familiar to you if you've been playing Pacifist this chapter. The final one is a spin on the Western challenge, where instead we're in the windows now and have to dodge, which is a fun enough spin, and it caught me by surprise the first time around. Honestly, my biggest gripe with the challenges is how little of them there are across the whole chapter. If the core gameplay segments were super lacking, but were like only half of the gameplay, it'd make a bit more sense. Outside of these minigames though, Tenna does actually have extra attacks if you don't trigger one of these. So what if you don't do Pacifist? Well, it's basically the same as Tenna also triggers the minigames upon being attacked. So these specific attacks only show up if you specifically use the I Love TV act, which is supposed to give you a smaller amount of points for less work as you don't have to play a minigame. When you reach the point threshold, Tenna does one final attack that is constantly flicking you between different physical challenges as if you were flicking between channels on a TV. It feels a lot like WarioWare in a way, but I think sometimes these transitions are a bit bullshit because the reactions reaction time needed to have pulled this off is insane. Hey, so while editing here, I realized the reason I wasn't able to shoot the tenor wasn't because of my reaction speed or anything, but it was because I was already registering a down input from the previous minigame, and when the next minigame comes up, my cursor was already at the bottom of the screen, meaning I did not have enough time to move it back up to shoot the tiny tenor. Maybe we should have, like, you know, removed the feature for inputs to carry over, like, in a split second like that. I don't know, I feel like that... Yeah. Bad decision, Toby. After we survive the minigames, we have to use sharpshooter to shoot tenor. I mean, the boss fight overall was pretty good, but the ending was pretty bad and the music wasn't as good as it could have been. Well, good thing this chapter jump scares off with the roaring night, bitch! Ooh, this fight is so good! I know I said the physical challenges were the highlight of this chapter, and in context, story-wise and everything, blah blah blah, yeah, sure. But in terms of raw gameplay, this fight is incredible! It's fun, fast-paced, has you balancing your options and strategizing more than ever before, a wide variety of attacks and options to consider when fighting given the gear you have access to at this point, and above all else, it's hard, like, really hard. There's a mechanic unique only to this fight where if Susie or Ralsei get knocked down, they take extreme amounts of fatal damage and won't naturally heal. The only way to bring them back at this point is by using a revive mint or revive dust, so you have to actually keep a tab on everyone's health and take full advantage of the defend command. That means you can't just blindly soak up damage or refuse to learn patterns or just spam one act over and over again to win. This is probably some of the most enjoyment I've got out of Deltarune, period. Pretty much every single attack in this fight is amazing, after the nerf that fixes sword channel attack so the hitbox wasn't the size of Jupiter. Other than this one part in the final attack, because this transition from this move to this move is kind of bullshit, but other than that, this fight is flawless. In a vacuum. See, a few more problems arise when we start to look at Ram and his previously mentioned rambunctious quest, but we're not looking at that just yet. Sorry, Ram. There isn't any more gameplay past the night fight in Chapter 3, so I think we should move on to...
In the beginning.
One of Deltarune's and even Undertale's main claims to fame was its writing. These quirky characters with their witty dialogue that was very in tune with internet culture at the time while also being able to tell a subversive and engaging story of complex and engaging characters for the most part. The writing in Chapter 3 is, it's pretty messy. If I could explain it in 2 words, it'd be unfunny and... shit. Bad. Like I said before, we can skip the start of the chapter on repeat playthroughs, which is very appreciated because this section drags. It's not even bad, it just goes on for a long while. The actual dialogue between Susie and Ralsei is fine though, with Susie trying to ask Ralsei to come to the festival with them in the Light World, where Ralsei has to reluctantly inform Susie that Darkness can't go to the Light World. So this is all fine and good until Ralsei puts his foot down, stops dead in his tracks, bringing the game to a complete standstill so he can lure them to Susie about how Darkness work. Look, I get that Susie is a bit dense and hasn't figured it out yet, but surely Toby Fox knows that we know. We as in both the player and Chris. In Chapter 1, while it wasn't ever stated at all, you could piece together on how Darkness worked even when we had very little to go off of. In Chapter 2, the game pretty clearly spells it out for you when Ralsei makes you grab the objects from Anyu's classroom and bring them into the supply closet, only for all the Darkness to immediately appear afterwards when none of them were present before. This even happens again near the end of the chapter, so the player should know this by now. So this whole cutscene feels extremely unnecessary. Even if they wanted Ralsei to explain it to Susie, going about it like this feels odd. I almost forgot to mention that the music playing during this part is from the Weird Route. A bizarre choice that makes it feel like the game is putting a lot more weight into this information than it should on top of everything else. Having Susie kind of freak out and tell Ralsei that he's real to her is good, and having Tenet interrupt them provides good contrast and is a smart way to bring in the character. We also get to see the Tenet VHS tape, which is pretty fun. Weird as hell to hear a character in a Toby Fox game actually speak though, making Tenet the first character from Undertale or Deltarune to have a canon voice. Yeah, except Jewel does have voice lines too.
I can do anything!
Metaton says, oh yeah, in Undertale. Whatever, okay, it's still cool. Makes it even more jarring when we cut back to the usual
Maybe it's the way you're dressed.
Tenet has a fine enough introduction. Not as strong as King's, but more creative and fun than Queen's. I think if Queen's included the Punch-Out minigame, it'd rank higher. The most interesting bit of dialogue here is, oh hey look, a genuine Ralsei plush I can purchase for real money on fangamer.com. Okay, let's talk about this. Deltarune Chapter 3 features 5 separate and unique instances of the genuine real-life product that is the hatless Ralsei plush featured on the Fangamer store. What the hell, Tricky Tony? One thing I had always appreciated about Undertale, and more applicably Deltarune, is that they never felt like they bought into their own hype. Closest we got to that was certain dialogue with Alphys, Undyne, and the Sands in reference to Undertale in Chapter 1. These were just ways to tell the player, who at the time was probably freaking out that this game even existed, that this doesn't take place after Undertale and is definitely in an alternate universe. This just feels lazy, constantly shoving an actual product from the official store in your face throughout the chapter like, Toby, I just paid you and you're trying to add extra items to my shopping cart! Well, guess what, bitch? I don't even like Ralsei's hatless design. Relative to the hatted design at least, I still think that's better, but that's a tangent for another time. Hashtag not my Ralsei. I've seen people defend this by saying it's meant to be a parody on how much advertisements are on TV and how they'll constantly shill products, but you can't make fun of something by doing the exact same thing, you know? If this was a fake product, or a fake Ralsei plush that they kept shilling, I think it'd be fine, but the fact it's the real one puts a bad taste in my mouth. Toby Fox never came off as a greedy guy to me, and he still doesn't, so this is just such an oddity. It's a bit hard to get immersed in your story when you're constantly showing me merch for the game. Oh, and the previously mentioned quiz question is the most egregious. It literally tells you the price of the shitting thing. Like, come on, dude, that's insane. Can you imagine if any other indie game did this?
Hello, Hornet. If you hand me exactly 350 rosaries plus handling and shipping, you too can have your very own plush of yourself crafted by me.
And then it was just a picture of the actual product on the Fangamer store. That'd be outrageous, right? There's always been meta humor and thoughtful stuff in these games, but never to this degree. It literally feels fan-made the way it's done, like some fan animation you would find on YouTube after the chapter's release parodying it, but no, it's just from the game. All of this is to say that I don't like this running gag. I think it's lazy, ruins immersion, feels like they're trying to get you to buy something, and like the game is buying into its own hype too much. I can't think of anything like this in the first two chapters or the following chapter 4, it's just really lame. This is also to say that in general, I don't think this chapter is very funny. Some good gags here and there, but they have the same vibe of finding a funny video that someone has reposted with 5 different surrounding captions, all of which not making the video any funnier. It's a good joke just surrounded by cringe. I use that analogy because why the hell is Rules Card here? Rules being here doesn't even make sense. So far the only Darkner confirmed to be able to travel through worlds by themselves is Ralsei, others needing the assistance of Lightness to be brought into Dark Worlds. This means that Rules has no way of even getting to this Dark World, yet lo and behold, here he is! His appearance in Chapter 1 makes sense as, you know, that's where he originates from. In Chapter 2 we see him enter our inventory then fly out when we reach the Dark World. He doesn't re-enter our inventory after we drop him off at Castle Town at the end of Chapter 2, so in Chapter 3 he just shouldn't be here. Same goes for Lancer as well, as we can see him in Castle Town when we return to it after sealing the Dark Fountain, so neither of them should be on us, and therefore shouldn't be in this Dark World. It feels like an extremely lazy way to fill out the cast of the chapter, as without them we're only left with Tenor, Ram, and the Weather Duo in terms of core characters that aren't also regular enemies. Rules gets more screen time in this chapter than he did in both chapters 1 and 2 combined, as well as way more plot relevance, which is baffling considering he shouldn't be here in the first place. And a lot of the screen time he gets I don't find particularly engaging. I don't even think his scenes are awful by themselves, aside from the fight with him later, but there is so much focus put on a guy we've already seen for 2 chapters now who isn't of much significance, and I would much rather see more new and unique characters like the Weather Duo and Ram. I should clarify that I don't dislike him as a character or anything. I think he had one of the funniest jokes in Chapter 1. It couldn't have been hard to come up with more unique characters to litter the world, right? Think of stuff like Jigsaw Joe in Chapter 1, the Hacker and the Addisons in Chapter 2, stuff to actually give more life to this world and flesh out its identity. It can't be hard to have some more of that surely. The whole theming of this world being about TV lends itself to so many different ideas. Almost all NPCs in this chapter are just regular enemies given that role, which is really lame. The Weather Duo existing just tells me we could have had way more characters like this. News anchors, celebrities that star in shows, cartoon characters, the list goes on really. Not to mention, this isn't just a world themed around TV shows and the like, it is also a world set in the main character's fucking house. There is so much you could pull from there too, and a lot of people, myself included, thought something would come of the flowers discarded in the kitchen bin. Even if this wasn't a boss or an enemy, an NPC at the bare minimum would have been nice. But no, we're stuck with Chapter 1 enemy reskins meant to resemble a bunch of dirt and dust. How creative. Toby must have been working overtime on that one. The only characters that have any actual ties to Chris as far as I can understand are Tenor and Ram. And I guess Cool Trashy, though obviously it's not quite as in-depth as the main guy of the chapter in the British Power strip. Wait. Okay, so Ram is clearly British. We know this because of his spelling of the word mum and him saying love, which is probably one of the most British sounding things you can say. But why is Ram British? This may seem like a weird point to make, but Ram being British actually opens up an oversight with his design. We know that Ram in the Light World is a power strip, we know this because he literally tells us that. Also that Ram is taken from the library. This adds up so far as the Chapter 2 Dark World features the Werewires, who were plug socket enemies. This is corroborated by the fact that their face is actually in the shape of a plug socket. An American plug socket. See, some of you may not know, but plug sockets in America are actually different from the ones in the UK and Britain. British plug sockets actually look like this, which means that RAM should instead look like this, a British plug socket. So this either means one of two things. 1, RAM is just an American plug socket with a British accent for some reason, or 2, Toby Fox didn't know this distinction and just decided to make RAM British with some minor variety, and it is absolutely the second option here. Obviously this doesn't affect my enjoyment of the chapter or the character, but I think it's worth noting, and a bit more care could have been put into this choice to avoid this oversight. Also because the sentence RAM being British causes a design oversight is hilarious. I do commend Toby Fox for being able to make a British character that Americans on the internet don't hate. Honestly, that might be because the average Deltarune fan doesn't have great reading comprehension and they haven't picked up on it yet. That's the end of the British segment. You can stop mashing the right arrow key on your keyboard now. Chapter 1 was literally just set in an old, dusty, unused classroom, and Chapter 2 was set in the library's computer room. These locations don't have as much stuff to pull from if you ask me, as they have way less personal connection to the main character. The minimal size of the cast in Chapter 3 really feels like a result of poor writing or laziness, and I would rather lean on the first one because I don't think Toby or his team are lazy. Or maybe Toby was just too busy voicing in a Homestuck animated pilot.
Little fucking monsters!
There was so much more that could be done with this setting, it's so much better that could have been done, so what we're left with is not only bad in the vacuum, but in context feels really underbaked. It's like they had a whole chapter and just shipped it with half of the content included. Anyway, after board 1 we talked to Ram himself a bit. His dialogue is pretty fun. He also makes reference to Jevil, which is weird. This isn't even the last time he references a secret boss either. This is probably foreshadowing, but it all feels a bit too on the nose. We can also meet up with El Nina and Lenino in the green room here, and upon bringing up their partner they immediately start crying, and I don't think this dialogue is anything special, but I do like El Nina's crying sprite because it looks very funny. I think interacting with these characters shows that there was a lot of potential here. It's not like the actual new characters we got weren't engaging at all. At best they feel half-baked like the entirety of the chapter, so I'm not going to put the blame on them. It just feels like missing screen time with them given how they're some of the only few new characters in this chapter. There's a cool scene we can see that I think is entirely optional, but if we do choose to view it, we get to see Susie going to talk to Tenna just to say,
Hey man, I had fun playing Dogshit Zelda.
but right before that we do see Tenna talking to some mysterious person we don't exactly know, which I assume is meant to be one of the regular enemies Tenna is directed to create the bald Toriel was later found in. They mention that someone is supposedly located in the Purple Cliffs, and I don't know who else that could be besides Toriel. This is some decent foreshadowing, however I feel like by the time you even process this and what it means, you've already found what it's referencing and forgotten all about this quick set of lines. It's trying to build up a mystery that isn't given enough attention to be satisfying, nor give the player enough clues to actually start wanting to put the pieces together. Even later when the mystery instead becomes why Tenna needs Toriel, it doesn't really put anything into developing that mystery either. The second game board has better dialogue in my opinion, and is also a bit more fun with better back and forth between the characters. Especially when Tenna leaves and Susie messes around with the controller ports on the console, leading to some good interactions. The inciting incident being her unable to solve a basic puzzle, so she calls upon Chris to solve it for her, is pretty good too. Though again, being limited to just two characters interacting with one another is a bit limiting for this kind of thing. There isn't much writing in the boards that's noteworthy. There's a couple decent interactions like I mentioned, but nothing that really had me sitting there laughing like an idiot. Kinda wish there was more banter between the characters here, but Tenna isn't even here the whole time, and one of them is mute, so if you're expecting a Deltarune version of Only Plays, you're out of luck.
Ralphie, what would you do if Chris turned into a worm? It slithered on the ground. It was like, I'm a crazy fucked up worm. What would you do, Ralphie? How would you react? What would you say?
I wouldn't. I don't know. I think I'd be pretty weirded out. I'm upset.
Ralsei acts like a bit of a goody two-shoes little bitch, being like, hey, we gotta play by the rules. So Susie tells him,
No, I wanna have fun. Also, do your own damn thing, you stupid
so he plays along for a bit with the whole thing if you decide that yeah, he should do that. I like that this leads to you being able to troll Susie by picking up items she doesn't want with her avatar, but the much funnier interaction is if you leave Susie to try and mess with Ralsei. This is really stupid, and it's funny and also very missable. B+, Toby, put your good material first and foremost next time. One neat thing out of this though is a very minor detail going forward. Beforehand, Ralsei would follow and select whatever option you pick on the quiz, same with Susie since she's not exactly the brightest. Ralsei probably does this as he believes he is bound to serve the Lightners and make them happy, so he puts a lot of trust into them and probably doesn't want to upset them by straying away from what they think is correct, even if he does know the answer himself. Any quiz you take after this though, he will actually go out of his way to select the answer he thinks is correct. Sometimes. Still, this is a neat detail and furthers Ralsei's development as an independent person who isn't 24/7 worried about if Chris would approve of his every action. The end of the board kinda comes out of nowhere, and it also tells us for some reason the rules card had assumed that all 3 members of the trio are in a throuple. I guess this is the throwaway joke of the chapter, because rules, why are you assuming the relationship status of a bunch of teenagers? That's kinda weird, bro. Or, alternatively, this is a joke about how a lot of Deltarune fans make a lot of shipping material that is borderline nonsensical. Like seriously, some of you people could see Susie and Noelle make up for 5 minutes straight only to go,
Okay, but I think that Chris will end up with Noelle, yes!
and if that was the joke, I retract anything negative I've ever said about it, and it's actually awesome. At this point, both the characters in-game and I have had enough of playing the Zelda 1 stuff, and we're 2 rounds in and ready to go home. But since Tenor is taking some extra time to prep the board, we investigate our surroundings, and by that I mean do a single fight with an enemy and then some basic puzzles to then find Toriel. I think this whole segment is poorly done, and it's entirely possible for you to just stumble into this without even knowing you're meant to be snooping around because Tenor is acting weird. Given they were just recently building up some mystery stuff, you think solving the thing would require more direct input, but no, it's just talk to this random guy and then boom, here's Toriel. There are at least some good character moments in between here where Ralsei asks you to check on how Susie's doing, which you can refute and ask Ralsei how he's doing instead. Both of the interactions here are really good, and I think more of this sort of stuff was sorely missing from the rest of the chapter. Anyway, Tenor comes in to check on Toriel for some reason, which does actually lead to the funniest joke in the... Why am I whispering? Which does actually lead to the funniest joke in the chapter. He at least tells us that he doesn't want to hurt Toriel, but needs her for something he wants. Or, due to the wording, probably needs. We however have no clue what any of this means, but it is a much more interesting mystery that I wish we spent more time building up, unlike the prior mystery. Trying to figure out why Tenor needs Toriel would be a lot better than the game basically dropping this completely until the very end of the chapter where it isn't even specifically answered, but again I'm getting ahead of myself. Tenor's reaction to all of this and the direct confrontation from Susie and Ralsei is what makes him snap and force us to play the games, but at this point we don't really have anything to work off of on why he wants us. So after we get plunged into TV world, there is, as far as I can recall, not a single further development on the what the hell is Tenor doing with Toriel Dreamer mystery. Aside in the boringness of the whole segment, as there isn't really a narrative to follow along. It's just that we gotta escape and Tenor is looking for us, supposedly at least. But again, we never confront him or even have a chance to run into him during this, so there's no stakes, no developing mystery, and like previously mentioned, no engaging gameplay. All we have to cling on to here is that Tenor needs Toriel for something. We don't get any new info in this segment, so we're just stuck with all this nonsense. In Card Castle, we knew our goal and just had a very important encounter with Lancer, which lends to building tension up to the approach to the fountain, which culminates in a way that feels like the natural conclusion of what we know while feeling satisfying narratively. Seriously though, the whole scene of confronting King for the first time is one of the best parts of the entire game to me. I love it. This is something the chapter has built up since its start with the first Lancer fight and further developed the confrontation and the ramifications of it as it went on, with Lancer talking to us as we walked up to Card Castle and such. It's also much shorter than TV World, allowing it not to feel like there's long gaps of no further plot development, so it never feels aimless. Pandora Palace immediately establishes the goal of reuniting the team and rescuing Noelle. While you do reunite the team pretty quickly, that overarching goal of trying to save Noelle develops pretty well and is a reason to explain why certain stuff is happening. We don't just go to the Acid Lake for no reason, but it is both to distract Queen and progress further in the mansion. Not to mention the various unique rooms and branching paths that actually led to something. We have no attachment to TV World as a place and didn't even really know this whole area was a thing beforehand, and it doesn't feel like a place either. Just a bunch of narrow hallways and nothing interesting in them. There's a unique balance you have to strike between making something feel like an actual lived-in location and making it like a video game. TV World completely falls on the end of just feeling like a video game, and even then, it's not a very fun one. TV World fails at being engaging on all fronts, which is such a shame after Pandora Palace beforehand. Despite Card Castle having less stuff in it, it accomplishes more in its time frame, making the actual ratio of interesting stuff going on way higher, and it had narrative backing to boot. We could have at least done something with Tenor trying to track us down to give any form of suspense, but it never feels like it. Combined with the previously mentioned horrid layout, it just feels like we're holding forward until the next cutscene happens, and so on and so forth. I know I ragged on the enemies beforehand, and while I do stand by it, there is one neat detail about this that you can pick up on and is basically confirmed in Chapter 4. The Pippins being here and being identical to their Chapter 1 look, as well as the similar looking rabbit clone enemies, tells us that Chris most likely made the Dark World in Chapter 1. Dark Worlds change depending on who created them, something we learn in Chapter 4. So the same result would be produced if the same person affected the same object. This does seem to get a bit messy with the existence of Rules Card and Lancer, who we see across multiple Dark Worlds who don't change their look regardless of who made the fountain, but there is absolutely no way Chris made the Dark Fountain in Chapter 2, but regardless it's neat. This is even corroborated by the similar purple cliffs areas at the start of both chapters, which add to this nicely. It's a cool detail that explains a minor question left from Chapter 1, that's some good writing, but also doesn't excuse the lack of enemy variety. You could still have these guys and throw in a bunch of other stuff, but I already went over that. I do not want want to talk about fucking rules card again. Look, here's the laser pointer gag. Clap, now that's all we need to discuss here. I'm sick of it! At this point, basically everyone has left Tenor, including Mike, a character we keep hearing the name of but don't know anything about. This character is also name dropped by Spamton quite strangely in Chapter 2, so there's a bit of build up to whoever this is. This either means that Mike is able to travel across Dark Worlds, or Spamton only knows him from the time where Chris had brought the laptop home. Though I would say it's most likely the former, as the lack of conclusion to this character tells me we haven't heard the last of them. Actually, speaking of Spamton, remember Spamton? Tenor indirectly addresses him here too, showing that they at least know each other. I don't really know what the connection between them was, besides that they briefly worked together. We don't really get a further explanation on the relationship between these two characters at any point, which is a shame because it'd be really interesting to learn about. Anyway, in TV World there's a secret room that gives us more information. This scene sucks. It just does. It's not funny, doesn't really tell us anything, and handles one of the characters so poorly, I'm genuinely shocked this isn't some fan animation on YouTube. The whole joke of this scene is just how long Tenor freaks out at seeing Spamton, who I guess can just casually jump out of our inventory now, but it goes on for, no joke, 30 seconds. And the only thing worse than sitting through all of this is imagining someone sitting through it and laughing their ass off. Thankfully you can just speed through it if you're unfortunate enough to accidentally stumble into it, but what a lame excuse to avoid getting any actual interaction between these two characters. Because Tenor wasn't freaking out seeing Spamton again, he was just freaking out because he thought it was some kind of rat or something that might have hurt the pippers he's keeping. Spamton's way of speaking here is weird, almost like he's entirely reverted back to a previous state that ignores what happens to him during his final scene in the previous chapter, only boiling him down to the thing most people know him for and still messing that up. Okay, so, at the end of the Spamton fight where we cut his strings, he is next seen strung up by vines on the wall in this room where he for once talks to us completely normally. The only other times his speech wasn't effective were during these brief blips in his shot, but this is the only time he can do it for a long period, and even then it's debatable if in these little blips it was actually Spamton talking. It's a strong scene, and the fact he casually hops out just fine here is one thing, but the fact his speech is reverted is another. Not only has it reverted, but it seems to have entirely missed how his speech even worked. Spamton would constantly be interrupted by a bunch of spam advertising. That was his shtick. But now, they just put random words in brackets and call it a day. I get this whole scene is entirely optional, but if all it serves is to worsen my opinion of the game's writing, it shouldn't even be here. It is genuinely so bad and poorly done that it feels like a fan-made animation you would come across on YouTube, and it shocks me this made it into the final game as is. This thing sucks, thumbs down Tricky Tony. A friend of mine made a good point, saying if they really wanted to have Tenor get jump scared by Spamton, it'd be way more cool if you could do it during the fight with Tenor, potentially debuffing his stats, or giving Susie time to rig the point system a bit while Tenor isn't looking, you know, just anything more interesting than whatever this was meant to be. One interesting thing about returning to the green room at this point, or rather the surrounding area, is that this one Zapper has turned to stone right beside this Pippins who remains completely intact. The Pippins is also confused, asking why he wasn't the one to turn to stone, which I think is pretty interesting. It lends to the idea that Darkness turning to stone isn't just because they, quote-unquote, don't belong, it's when they no longer serve a purpose in the world they're in. Given that the show is over, there's no reason for the Zapper to be here, no TV shows, no need for a remote. So what purpose does this Pippin serve in comparison? If we want to be real loose with this stuff and say, oh well, you can still roll dice without TV shows, then I can retort with saying, why did Lancer almost immediately turn to stone after freeing us in Chapter 2 when he could have easily helped us distract Queen while Susie and Birdley went to rescue Noelle? I feel like writing this as the actual reason makes it super flimsy to work around without contradicting itself. I suppose this is meant to be the explanation as to why Lancer and Rules got to stick around. Since Lancer helps us out in the board, so he serves a purpose, and Rules ultimately helps Lanino and El Nina get back together in a very backwards way, but also if he didn't interject in the first place, this wouldn't need to happen, so I have no clue what this even accomplishes, and it just makes everything more confusing. Probably should have just stuck to how it worked in Chapter 2, or at least how we assumed it worked based on what we knew at the time, because this, while interesting, doesn't work in practicality. Also, when you boil it down, it's basically just Darkness get to stick around as long as the plot needs them to, which when you realize that, it becomes some of the laziest and lamest writing I've ever seen. I know some people thought having Darkness basically be blocked off from other worlds in this way was lame, and while it's a pretty simple way of stopping us just yelling at Jebel to wake up and start doing crazy shit, also just works. It was easy to understand and made sense, and set up that going forward we can't just bring everyone everywhere. It served its purpose as a literary trope. This expanded upon version just doesn't, for all the reasons I've gone through. Again, on paper, I don't hate this idea, but if we were going to go through with it, I think leaning into a more stripped back version would be able to both expand upon the idea as well as not cause various inconsistencies. I propose the idea of a Darkner being able to earn their way into a Dark World. Darkners already have a bit of time before turning to stone in a world that isn't their own. But if during this time they manage to click with the inhabitants of this dark world, they won't turn to stone. You could even use this to explain how Rules got to stick around for as long as he did. I'm pretty sure this idea is already part of how it works without the more confusing part, so I say it's better. Therefore, I am better than Toby Fox. Yep, that's how it works. Right before the Tenor fight, Tenor himself actually does have some good dialogue, although only briefly. However, that doesn't change that this is a very long, drawn-out, boring cutscene of Tenor just explaining that nobody watches him, and that makes him sad. Basically, he's just like the toys at the start of Toy Story 3. It's later confirmed that Chris is working directly with the Knight, and we later find out the Knight needs Toriel for something. And since we know that Tenor is killed by the Knight immediately after returning Toriel, then Chris is fully aware that getting Toriel returned will end in Tenor's death. There's even an optional scene earlier where you could have had Chris be alone with Tenor, and Tenor's pretty fidgety and uncomfortable the whole time. Now we know it's because Chris grabbed Tenor by the nutsack and told him,
"Hey, if you mess this up, we will literally kill you."
And that's pretty funny. Also, did you know that Susie's drawn-out cutscene takes place after the Tenor fight instead of right after Tenor gives his sob story? Doesn't that seem weird to anyone else? I could have sworn they were back-to-back, but after playing the chapter again, nope, they're separated alright. Susie's one sucks more than Tenor's though, and that is because this really doesn't feel like Susie saying any of this. It's too planned, feeling too cohesive and too personal all of a sudden to someone she just met a couple of hours ago and doesn't even have any significant bond with. I want to compare this directly to something in Chapter 4 as I think it illustrates what I'm talking about and how you can write something like this for Susie. The part of Chapter 4 where Susie writes a note requested to her to write on behalf of the old man is a perfect scene, not only emotionally, but narratively as well. We see Susie actually build a bond with this character over the course of the chapter, and it's one of the main focuses of the chapter. When we see the note, it conveys the message to the best of Susie's abilities, because this isn't her strong suit or anything. She puts it in her own words while keeping it heartfelt, and wanting to convey the exact message as much as she possibly can, as she made a promise to someone she truly connected with. She's not used to this sort of thing, so of course the delivery of it will be more clunky, but she means well, and that's evident. Her trying to talk to Tenor here in Chapter 3 just misses all of that and feels super cheap. Why is Susie getting this personal with Tenor of all people? I know that they slightly bonded earlier in that scene when she talks to him after the first ball, but that's not really enough for all of this. She then gives her little pep talk in the same way Tenor and Ralsei do with this sort of flashback shit going on. I know of course she's not literally doing that in universe, but for her it just doesn't fit. Her style is a bit more rough around the edges and crude, but a good intention is there at the heart of it all. But here it feels like a completely different character, or even something made by a fan. It just doesn't understand its own characters on a deeper level like I expect the game to be able to do. That blunder aside, we do convince Tenor to return Toriel to us, which is very cool, but obviously like we mentioned a moment ago, that would get him killed. So he gets killed. So the Roaring Knight. I'm not really sure how I feel about this thing just rocking up all of a sudden. Kinda feels like bringing in the Knight at the end of this chapter is so it actually has some relevance to the story, otherwise Chapter 3 would have been entirely filler. There isn't really any actual build up to this. I know some people have said it's those moments of Tenor on the phone to someone, but that's literally about the construction of the ball Toriel's trapped in, as well as the location of her. Why would the Knight be making a super monkey ball capsule for Toriel? It could be the instance where Tenor is talking to someone during Board 2, but we hear none of that conversation, so it can't count as foreshadowing or build up, given the prior phone call gives us nothing related to the Knight to work off of. We know that the Knight wants Toriel for something, but they arrive exceedingly late for some reason. I'm not getting into who I think the Knight may be, because quite frankly the video is already long enough. But, regardless of who they are, why did they take so long to arrive? We don't know the actual time frame Chapter 3 is meant to take place over in-universe, but I'm gonna say the range is around 5 hours. In this time, the Knight could have easily made their way to the Dreamer House and grabbed Toriel, so we'll assume that they were exceedingly busy at the time. Doing what? We don't know, but it's fair to say they were just busy and or got caught up in something unexpected, given we don't know the character or their plan, so they could just be doing a myriad of things. How Undyne took so long to arrive is an absolute mystery though. We see Toriel call her before she goes to bed, meaning in the time it took to make a phone call, go to sleep, make a dark fountain, go through the entire Dark World while being stalled, fighting Tenor and the Knight, Undyne still showed up late. This kind of feels inexcusable to me and could have been written around if a bit more thought was put into it. She directly mentions on the phone to Toriel that she will be there soon, and the Dreamer household is just a brisk walk away from the police station since it's such a small town. We know that in terms of criminal activity, or at least any that would need attending to, Hometown has very little of that. Undyne outright says, "This job is so boring. Nothing ever happens in this town," near the end of Chapter 1, so the chance of her being preoccupied with something is beyond unlikely. The only thing we see that will require any attention is the massive pileup of cars blocking off the town in Chapter 2. Point being, Undyne would almost certainly not be busy and is confirmed as so during the phone call with Toriel, meaning her late arrival is a bit of a plot hole. It's not like Undyne would have to travel through the Dark World either. The entrance/exit door to the Dark World is right by where Toriel is being kept, which is accessed in the Light World through just entering the Dreamer household. You could have got around this somewhat by changing Toriel's phone dialogue to, "Well, please hurry." which would tell us that Undyne is actually caught up with something, explaining the late arrival. Granted, it would be a very simple way of doing it, but it's much better than her just mysteriously not showing up until late. The knight immediately taking Undyne tells us that not only do they need both her and Toriel, but Undyne is possibly a higher priority in the moment. Think about it this way, if the knight didn't take Undyne at this point and instead took Toriel, Undyne would be able to further raise awareness of this and begin hunting down the knight, putting their plans into jeopardy. Not only that, but Undyne would be able to attack the knight during this. The knight can easily take Undyne no problem, one grab and it's over. They don't do the same with Toriel. The knight attempts to grab them using this tractor beam type thing. I imagine they would carry her around like this way keeping her asleep. My personal theory for this is that Toriel has fire magic. Really strong fire magic. This we know because of Undertale, and characters between both games have relatively similar powers as demonstrated by Undyne in this same scene, and the knight clearly having a relation to ice and snow, and regardless of who they are, we know this based on the snowflake attacks they use and the pretty blatant deer antlers, which points them towards being a member of the Holiday family who are all connected to ice and snow in some way, and they're the only deer characters we know of. Would the natural weakness of the knight not be fire magic? Something tells me if the knight attempted to take Toriel normally while she's awake, even if it was using this weird bird form that they used to JV4 Undyne, Toriel would still have her hands free much like Undyne during this, allowing her to cast fire magic still and put the knight in extreme danger. The whole area where it has been arranged for the knight to pick up Toriel was also described earlier as being really cold by Susie, and there's snow everywhere along with the Christmas tree to boot. My guess is that this was an intentional design choice by the knight in the plan description, not only because they like Christmas a lot, but also because attempting to capture a fire magic user in a cold environment is probably your best bet, as it would offset the heat from the fire magic more than a regular location, making it less effective. I feel the knight would have definitely taken Toriel if not for Undyne showing up, who would be able to stop them from doing this and then potentially risking Toriel waking up. Honestly, the more I think about this scene, the more I like it and understand it, but the whole thing about Undyne being late still bugs me. If we actually beat the knight, an alternate cutscene plays that ends with our team, excluding Chris, being swooned, with Chris instead being knighted by the Roaring Knight. The debate is mainly over if the knight was the one that performed the slash or if it was Chris. Well, I myself don't believe for 100% certain that it is Chris, because quite frankly the writing for this chapter has been in the shitter and that would be abnormally cool. You gotta admit the way this scene plays out is pretty weird, especially with Chris being knighted. So something has happened here different than the normal outcome to warrant them being knighted, and I'm gonna assume it ain't them playing a part in kicking the knight's ass, since why on earth would they knight Chris for that? Oh yeah, and then Susie gives chase and we don't make it to the bunker quite in time. The chapter then ends after Chris stands at the bunker alone and the door creaks open inviting them in, confirming without a shadow of a doubt that they are working with the Roaring Knight if that wasn't obvious enough already. When I first played this chapter, I left it feeling deeply unsatisfied, confused, and annoyed. The whole ending portion comes out of nowhere and slaps you around with so much stuff it feels incredibly cluttered and rushed after a chapter that was so drawn out with lacking content. If the rest of the chapter had kept up this level of interesting narrative, we could have honestly had a home run on our hands. But as it stands, I think this is the worst ending out of all 4 chapters currently, and it's not close. That's basically all I have to say in terms of the writing, excluding everything around Ram's Rambunctious Journey Deluxe Edition, but we'll get to him, I promise. Before we do though, I wanted to take a nice break to talk about... The music is a very important aspect of Deltarune, as it's one of the most highly praised aspects, along with one of the most highly praised of Undertale too. It's also the part I have the least negative to say about for Chapter 3. My least favourite of all the chapter OSTs, but it's still decent. It's just a little slimy, it's still good, it's still good. Honestly, the biggest letdown of the whole OST for me is Tenna's boss battle theme. It just doesn't quite have the same oomph that the previous chapter main bosses had in their themes. I think a pretty good way of demonstrating this is putting the highlights of each song side by side. So here's King's theme. Here's Queen's theme. And last, and very much least, here's Tenna's theme. You see what I mean? It doesn't have the required impact to really bring it on the same level. I do think that Black Knife, the Knight's theme, is up there though, so we did get at least one good major boss battle theme in here. Absolutely insane track, one of the biggest highlights in the chapter and a perfect fit for such a difficult fight. Something I've always liked about the OST of particularly Chapter 1 is how much of an Alice in Wonderland vibe it had. This strange new world with all these fantastical and mysterious places in an OST to match those places. One of my favourite examples being Quiet Autumn. Such a good vibe for something like a Dark World, right? I think Chapter 3 had a really good comparable track being Glowing Snow, which plays after returning to the Green Room area after TV World, where everything is shut down. It perfectly fits the somber atmosphere of the place with a twinge of mysteriousness floating in the air, as this is still a world we don't know all the details about. It's a really good track, I like this. Both Rude Buster remixes, Rude Buster and Vapor Buster, are smash hits and I love both of them, so praise where it's due. Like, just listen to this. Absolutely amazing stuff, I love it. Unfortunately, a lot of the tracks are tied to the game boards, meaning I hope you like 8-bit chiptune stuff. And this stuff isn't bad and it all fits what it's going for, but it just isn't that interesting to listen to and is very unmemorable. Some of these are so lame that they even get annoying to listen to in game. Overall, it's a fine OST, though with a few weaker spots and some particular blind spots. It doesn't have nearly the amount of fantastic stuff that all the other chapters had, which is a shame. Alright, now it's time to take a look at the side quest Ram has been trying to give me. The Shadow Mantle game, or just a Mantle game as the outline clearly spells out here, is a set of secret board games you can access after beating the original board and achieving an S rank or T rank to gain access to the S rank room, in which we can talk to Ram over here to gain access to what he dubs the original game. Tenor has apparently tampered with it to give us what we just played, and Ram also tells us that the game is now boring because of this. I mean, hey, at least someone out there agrees with me, thanks Ram.
I liked you, dude. Come here, bring it in. Bring it in, brother.
However, we try to play the game and don't have a controller connected, so we walk out all sad and stuff, only to find a controller just sitting there on the floor outside. Onto the actual Mantle game itself, this is the first board playable immediately after clearing the first board, and only after clearing the first board. We can't really do anything until we find a sword, with the only thing we can do after that is defeat all the enemies listed around the map. These aren't difficult to take down, so it's not as enthralling as Ram made it out to be. However, defeating enough enemies levels up our sword, and when it reaches the max level, we're able to break the trees where we can then find the ice key. I don't think this is particularly fun, but it's probably not supposed to be. Why Ram was acting like this was some sort of hidden gem masterpiece though is beyond me. His Metacritic page probably looks dire. When almost all enemies are cleared out, the music cuts out and we're left with just the sounds of the tide going in and out. It's honestly pretty unnerving and makes you realise that something ain't right. When I said the gameplay is nothing of note here, I do actually quite like how it doesn't tell you anything and just lets you figure it out yourself. It makes it more satisfying when you suddenly open an area and find something new. There's also this hidden character you can find if you snoop around enough. It flies away leaving black text on the floor reading, "See you soon," followed by, "Having fun?" After that, the game just ends and we can only play more after board 2. When it starts up, we have to find the sword again, which is pretty odd as the ice key is carried over from earlier, but not the sword. I don't even think this has story significance or anything, it's just odd. Either way, we perform more of the same from earlier until we're strong enough to access the raft. We then have to make our way over to the area which we could actually access earlier when we were playing the board normally, but only during that brief period where Tenor wasn't there because otherwise he would force us back. The door for the ice key is here too, and we can enter into, I don't know, the Ice Palace? Hey wait, isn't this meant to be a reference to the scrapped ice key from Banjo-Kazooie? Ooh, that's spooky alright. I know I touched on the music earlier, but out of any track in the chapter, this is probably the most fitting to any location. It reminds me of Lavender Town from Pokemon Red and Blue, which I assure you is high praise, because I still think that's one of the best scary songs in the game. More tracks like this please, this is a very good one for the setting and atmosphere. The whole section here is probably the most engaging part of any of these game boards, both regular and secret. You're instructed to follow the white cloak, and told the forbidden path began with ice magic. So I assume this is meant to be how people playing the game completely blind are meant to discover the weird route, which is a cool idea, but given how much this game is discussed online and how that whole thing exploded the moment someone found it, no clue how someone figured that out by themselves, by the way, but because of that whole incident, it's most likely been spoiled for most people, which is a damn shame, and I think that how widespread this information was should have been taken into consideration a little bit, though that fact is completely out of Toby and his team's control, so I'm not blaming them for it. However, does this make it so when I was playing a chapter for the first time, I assumed I had accidentally fucked over my pacifist save file with no real way to go back aside from redoing the whole chapter. All I was doing here was trying to find what I assumed was going to be the secret boss for the chapter and get the shadow crystal and whatnot. I can't imagine I'm the only one who had this experience with this portion, and it definitely makes me wonder if it was brought up in testing how this could be confused for something it's not. Anyway, we eventually run into definitely not Noelle.png and have to use her ice magic to turn enemies into blocks and push them on switches, but calling this a puzzle would be a stretch. Even the block puzzles from earlier in the regular game boards are extremely simple. Remember when Chapter 1 made jokes about this sort of stuff? There's also this Lost Woods type section hinted to us before where Not Noelle is meant to only walk up one of select pathways at random which indicates which path you should walk on. Despite being a bit buggy, this is an actual puzzle, unlike the last Enigmas. We make our way up to the door where we use the ice key again and use up Not Noelle, which has to be foreshadowing for later on in the weird route, or I guess forbidden path as the game dubs it. This has some pretty interesting implications and sets up for some cool stuff in the future. I just wish there was more cool stuff in the present. Finally, after passing through the door, there's nothing.
There's nothing. Thank you, son.
Except the shelter key. And oh yeah, Chris is apparently used up too after being thanked for their help by the same mysterious character from earlier. They turn away from the screen which shows their face has gone pale, so even they're freaked out by the implications of this whole sequence. Ram even makes a comment later about if Chris feels normal, indicating that they're still shook afterwards at least a little bit. Or you could interpret it as Ram knowing Chris so well that even the slightest oddity is immediately noticed by them when everyone else would be none the wiser. And that's some pretty neat attention to detail if I'm right about that. Though I do think there should have been a scene of Chris saying the game actually sucks so Ram could respond with, "Oi bruv, this fucking Mantle game is fucking shit, yeah?" The next time we get to play the Mantle game is after all of this. Ram is too busy turning to stone to move out the way, so we have to push him. This is probably meant to be symbolic of something, but I haven't the faintest clue on what it can mean, so I won't dwell on it. I haven't seen anyone else mention this either, so maybe it really doesn't mean anything. The final game not only opens in the Cyber City from Chapter 2, in Zelda form, but also with Ralsei and Susie following us. This time though, they're not controlled by their respective real-world counterparts. Real game counterparts. Yeah, you know what I mean. When I first played this part, I wandered around for ages looking for enemies until I tried opening these barricades with the sword and... This genuinely caught me off guard when I first played the chapter. Didn't expect it at all and was actually a pretty big moment of this chapter for me. Good subversion as you're never gated off from killing them at any point after you get the sword, but you'll either do it on pure accident or as a last resort, if you're a good person that is. Another thing to note is that the only thing present in this game so far is this lone cactus. Maybe this is meant to serve as a way out of the minigame, but I'm not sure why you would want to quit now. I'm committed at this point, dude. We then use our newfound strength to break the barricades and walk down this hallway until we end up in another dungeon type area. The music here is nowhere near as good though. It's basically just this sound looping over and over. I don't even find it creepy or foreboding. It's honestly more annoying than anything. I know this whole thing is going for a creepypasta vibe, but I think the music here could do with sounding creepier given it's the final part of this whole thing. Honestly, it kinda sounds like a little jingle you would hear before entering Dracula's castle. I think something more appropriate would be more droning and echoey. The best example I can think of is the track Deformity Wing from the Katamari Hospital DLC in Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion HD, one of my personal favourite games. I think something that sounds like this would have been a much better fit, but I'll let you listen and see if you agree. Gripe with the music aside, this is just a bunch of combat rooms where the goal is always just to kill every enemy present until we get enough XP to break open something blocking our path forward. We're used to this by now. I do wish the gameplay in literally any of the board game segments evolved past just walk around and pressing a button, because that's all this amounts to with some minor bits of dodging sprinkled in, since the enemies pack a punch this time. I've seen some people bring up how these encounters mirror specific Undertale characters, for example the yellow creature here surrounded by flowers being in reference to Asgore, or this fish representing Undyne. That's probably the case as these these seem too specifically designed not to be, but I don't really understand what the implications here are. The only room here that I found really interesting though was this one here with the
disgusting black creature
who mirrors your movements. You can't reach them across the gap in the middle of the room here, so I realized you had to move them onto the switch which opens up the gap. I was genuinely confused when this happened. Somehow I didn't remember this from my initial playthrough, and it shocked me just as much this time around. I haven't looked nearly enough into this portion of the game to understand what this could begin to mean, but Chris does kill this thing once we get close enough to them, allowing us to proceed. So well done, Chris, you weren't useless for once! Finally passing the trees that blocked us off, we run into Tenor for some reason. I don't think this is actually meant to be Tenor because why on earth would he randomly choose to log into this game just to talk to himself? Seems utterly bizarre to me. Apparently his fight dialogue changes if you do the Mantle game though, so that's weird. He talks a lot about Spamton and how right before he was going to tell Tenor how to become a big shot, he got a mysterious phone call, running out of the room after his face goes pale and leaving the receiver hanging. And no, I don't know what this is meant to be about, but we'll sure as hell find out later. I hope. I mean, we get so much Spamton acknowledgement in game and in merch and pretty much everywhere else officially while poor Jevil is left to rot. Yet despite all this, we still have no real clue what Spamton's deal is. It's cool to get some background information between these two characters though, as we know they have a past together, although I wish more of that was done in the actual chapter. Even if hidden, it'd be nice to delve deeper into the relationship these two had, since I don't think we'll be seeing Tenor much, if at all, past this point. And any content related to these two that isn't would be nice. We then make an approach towards the shelter, and Chris is particularly resistant against this, because they probably think at this point whatever's inside the actual shelter will be inside this one just in video game form, and they definitely do not want us to see that. Though that obviously doesn't stop me. Time to finally see what's inside the shelter. Oh, what the fuck? We finally encounter the mysterious figure who's been stalking us throughout the Mantle game, and it's none other than...
I have no idea who this is.
I struggle with this fight way more than I feel like I should, given I lost more times here than I did to the knight. Though I'll happily put this down to me actually being used to normal battles and not used to having actual fights in this shitty Zelda style of combat that the game has definitely not prepared me for. You would think everything prior just consisting of fighting enemies would prepare me, but all it taught me was how to attack. I don't think the game did even a remotely adequate job of building up to this fight and making sure you would be able to tackle it. It is objectively easier than the knight battle, but I personally struggle with it more just because I'm more used to the main gameplay style and not this. The fight itself is decent, but the music... is an assault on my ears. Quite possibly the worst boss battle theme in the game. I'm really not a fan of this one, and I don't think it complements the fight that well or any of the building atmosphere. All this weird creepy build-up and then this wet fart of a climax. I should mention that image_friend pops up during this fight as peons. I know literally nothing about this character as so far we don't really know anything about them, but it does confirm that friend and this boss are linked. As for the name of this guy, I know a lot of people have called them ERAM based on this one track name, but for me that makes it sound too much like it's related to RAM, which I don't believe to be the case. So I'll take a page out of Lukia's book and just refer to this thing as Nightmare from now on. After getting sniped, I do finally win and the game hits us with another oh shit moment, where we walk out of the game since we can't reach the chest holding the item we've been working towards getting this whole time with this stubby little NES character, and we need the actual Chris to grab it. I really like how a lot of these moments play with your expectations, leading to you being genuinely caught off guard when you stumble upon the solution. It's pretty clever because often you're able to get to the solution right away, but you would never think to do that. However, I think a big problem I have with this whole set of game boards is that outside of these oh shit moments, it's largely uninteresting and feels less like a creepypasta when it's the only thing we can do in the game. Gee, if only Deltarune had a creepypasta type alternate path accessible entirely through the standard segments through specific weird choices, furthering the feeling of it being like a creepypasta, instead of locking it off into an entirely optional, entirely skippable and all types of playthroughs side section, making it way less creepy. Hey, speaking of which, despite this whole thing being tagged as a forbidden route that it literally names, the only thing altered if you play on the save file where you're doing that is a single line of dialogue from Nightmare, and it's barely any different to what they were talking about before. You would think there would be a greater impact given the ties this has to that route, but this is the only change in the entire chapter as far as I'm aware. Anyway, let's have a look at what we got after all that work. A brand new armor item, the Shadow Mantle. This thing is insane, not in the actual stats it gives out, but because of its secondary effect, reducing all damage taken from dark/star attacks by a massive 66%, making any attack that counts as either of these only do a third of what they would normally do. But, there aren't any enemies in this chapter that have this type of attack. That's all chapter 4 stuff, right? This changes everything. This secret item now allows the hardest and hardest hitting boss in the entire game to do significantly less damage, making obtaining the Shadow Crystal item from the boss way easier. So, you remember earlier when I said that this fight is flawless in a vacuum? Well, this is the item that resides outside of that vacuum. This item that makes the hardest fight in the game so far is also attached to a very important item is entirely missable, which doesn't seem too bad at first until you realize that not only is it missable, you are outright locked out of obtaining it mid-chapter if you mess up and you wouldn't even know it. How early is it that you're locked out of it then? Well, any point after clearing the second game board and saving the game. Yep. If you save past this point in the game without doing the first part of the Mantle game, you are permanently locked out of obtaining this item for your save file. Or even if you do the first one, if you miss the second one right after the second board and save after entering TV World, you are also permanently locked out of this item for your save file. This is the first time an item in the game has been permanently locked out of the player's possession mid-chapter without being a Wizroot exclusive item. You just don't do shit like this, man. Utterly appalling game design, because let's say you got an S rank on board 1, then let's say you also jump straight into the second board as you want to do all the main story beats first, then come back and do all the side stuff. First of all, shit way to play any game, but second of all, well done, you've now locked yourself out of an item that is extremely crucial to doing all the side content you want to do. Good job. But Deltarune has never put this kind of missable content into the game outside of at the very end of chapters where obviously you can't go back. However, what if you finish the first game board in this brand new Deltarune chapter you've been waiting for years, got anything below an S rank, and therefore can't even access the room in the first place? You really think the player is gonna go, oh fiddlesticks, guess I'll reset my save file in this chapter? Of course not, that would be insane! This means that you're probably going to progress like normal, or maybe you even think, well I know board 2 is up next, so if I do better there, I can check out what's behind the door. Which is a logical line of thinking because all the other rank room awards are stuff that don't seem to progress throughout the chapter in any way, so unlocking them all means you'll get to reap all the rewards. But Miss Willow, I hear you furiously type away in the comments section, isn't there a Pippins you can pay points to so you can unlock S rank without obtaining it? Well yes, you got me there. There is. For 1,500 points! I got a T rank, the secret highest rank you can get, and you know how many points I had coming out of the first board? 1,646! I barely scraped by being able to afford this thing despite me getting the highest rank that the game never requires you to get for anything. If I barely had enough points, you think the players getting lower ranks would have enough? Absolutely not! And sure, the player could dump all their Dark Dollars into point conversion to make up for the remaining amount in the S rank room, but even then, if you magically got an A rank, have enough points for the S rank purchase, want to dump all of your new chapter exclusive currency into this one thing right away from the secret NPC, if you are the type to talk to all the NPCs, then you probably didn't miss this one particular NPC at the start of the chapter telling you that, oh, I don't know, ranks do not matter and it's all about having fun! Even if you are good enough to beat the knight without the mantle despite not getting an S rank or just missing the whole secret area, I sure hope you weren't interested in fighting the secret boss of the chapter, and yes, Nightmare is the secret boss because they are, you know, a secret. Out of all the points I've made in this video, I think this is the only one I won't get any pushback on because it seems like everyone is in collective agreement on this. Big thumbs down, Tricky Tony. Deltarune is a good game. Deltarune is a really good game, but this single design choice here is one of the single worst things I have ever seen in a game. Full stop. The player who misses out on the Shadow Mantle item through not getting a high enough rank is not going to be the kind of player who is able to sweep through the night battle without this item. The players who accidentally skip over this are probably going to be extremely pissed to find out that this fight could have been made considerably easier if they hadn't unknowingly locked themselves out of accessing it. This singular item takes an already lacking experience and throws in one final giant gut punch to the player. But it doesn't matter to me because I beat the knight first try on my no mantle save file. So, to recap, Deltarune Chapter 3 is lacking in engaging and fun gameplay that strays too far away from what made the game fun in the first place, and even when it returns to that type of gameplay it messes it up horribly. Has an extremely limited cast, a large chunk of them not even being new characters. Has horrible enemy variety, leading to a lot of battles feeling samey, and the enemies we get aren't even that good to make up for it. It has an extremely open and fun to adapt setting, as a whole movie making set with a bunch of TV shows and the such, and does nothing with it. The fact this is meant to be a dark world set inside the main character's house goes largely unremarked upon outside of very minor moments. Has a lacking narrative until the very end, largely making the entire experience feel like filler. Has a bad sense of humor in comparison to the rest of the game outside of a handful of specific moments, so its usual sense of wit fills off. Messes up previously established characters in exchange for a cheap gag that's so unfunny and poorly done it feels fan-made. Has the most lacking OST out of any of the chapters. Has really good and creative minigames for the most part, but they're the only source that really takes advantage of the TV theming. And finally, has an entirely optional, missable, poorly hinted at secret set of minigames that give the player a near crucial item to continue with obtaining rare collectible items that people who want to see the whole game through will want to grab, ultimately undercutting what would be the best part of the chapter. and it features too much rules card. I want to have liked Deltarune Chapter 3 just as much as some of you out there no doubt enjoyed it, but as a fan of this game who's been here since the very start, this is not only a letdown but a straight up poor quality product relative to the rest of the experience. I obviously don't hate Toby Fox or any of his team members, I just don't think that this is the best thing they could have made, and I really wish it was up to the quality I had come to expect from this game. I don't dislike it for being different, I dislike it for being not very good. Like the title of the video! I mean, game is dumb stupid, I hate it, 0 out of 10, I hate Toby Fox, what a wash loser. This chapter sucks and anyone who works on it should get fired! Ah!